What if the financial system that has ruled the world for the last 80 years is quietly being dismantled, not through war, not through a crash, but through a slow, calculated, and absolutely deliberate power play being orchestrated right now by one man in Beijing? Because that is exactly what we are seeing unfold in real time. And if you think this is just another story about China and America trading economic punches, you are underestimating what is actually at stake here. This is not about trade. This is not about tariffs. This is about who gets to write the rules of global money for the next century. And right now, President Xi Jinping is accelerating a plan that could fundamentally redefine the global financial order as we know it. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you are going to see the world a little differently. And before we go any further, if you find value in content like this, real, deep analysis on the forces shaping our world, please hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and share this video with someone who needs to understand what is happening. Your support is what keeps this channel alive and independent. Now let's get into it. For decades, the dollar has been the undisputed king of the global financial system. When countries trade oil, they use dollars. When governments store their wealth in foreign reserves, they hold dollars. When a Brazilian company wants to buy goods from a Vietnamese supplier, they negotiate in dollars. It is the invisible backbone of every major economic transaction on the planet. The dollar accounts for roughly 56% of global foreign exchange reserves and handles close to 90% of the $95 trillion in annual global trade, according to the Bank for International Settlements. That is not just dominance. That is a monopoly. And monopolies, as history shows us, never last forever. Enter Xi Jinping. In a February article published in Xiaoshi, the Communist Party of China's flagship theoretical journal, which is essentially the party's Bible for doctrine and direction, Xi laid out his vision in no uncertain terms. He called for a strong yuan with reserve currency status, broad use in international trade, investment, and foreign exchange markets. He framed a powerful currency and a modern financial system not just as economic goals, but as pillars of national power itself. When Xi Jinping writes something in Xiaoshi, you do not read it as rhetoric. You read it as a roadmap. And the world is starting to pay very close attention. Now here is where this story gets really interesting. This is not a new ambition for Beijing. China has been quietly pushing the yuan's internationalization for years. But what has changed is the urgency, the scale, and the global environment in which this push is happening. And those three things together create something genuinely historic. Let's talk about what China is actually doing, because actions speak louder than speeches. The first major move is the expansion of CIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system. Think of CIPS as China's answer to SWIFT, the Western-controlled messaging network that processes the vast majority of international financial transactions. SWIFT is essentially the highway that global money travels on. And for decades, the United States has used access to that highway as a geopolitical weapon. Ask Russia. In 2022, after the invasion of Ukraine, Russia was cut off from SWIFT almost overnight. Hundreds of billions of dollars in reserves were frozen. The message to every government in the world was clear. If you cross Washington, your money can disappear. China watched that happen, and China decided it would never allow itself to be in that position. CIPS now processes over $725 billion annually, up from $480 billion just 2 years ago. That is a 50% jump in transaction volume in under 2 years. The network is expanding fast, and it is giving countries an alternative to a dollar-based system that many are increasingly uncomfortable with. The second pillar of Beijing's strategy is currency swap agreements. The People's Bank of China, the PBOC, has established currency swap lines with 39 central banks around the world, totaling $591 billion in agreements by early 2025. These deals allow countries to trade directly in yuan without ever touching the dollar. Pakistan, Argentina, Kenya, countries that have historically been dependent on dollar liquidity, are increasingly turning to Beijing for financial lifelines denominated in yuan. Kenya converted approximately $3.5 billion of dollar-denominated debt owed to China into renminbi last October. Ethiopia is reportedly considering a similar move. This is not a coincidence. This is a coordinated strategy. And then there is the third and perhaps most transformative piece of this puzzle, the digital yuan, known as the e-CNY. This is where things get genuinely revolutionary. The People's Bank of China has been developing and expanding its central bank digital currency for years, and by the end of November 2025, cumulative e-CNY transactions reached 16.7 trillion yuan. Let that number sink in. 16.7 trillion yuan in digital currency transactions. This is not an experiment anymore. This is a functioning parallel financial system being built in real time. But the domestic numbers are only part of the story. The more important development is what China is doing with the digital yuan internationally. In December 2025, the digital yuan made its first steps into Southeast Asia, enabling cross-border trade payments between China and Laos. The PBOC has established an international operations center in Shanghai specifically focused on international digital yuan trade, and a multi-country CBDC interoperability project called mBridge, which brings together central banks from the UAE, Thailand, Hong Kong, and China, has already processed over $55 billion in international trade transactions since 2022. And that number is growing fast. Now think about what this means in practice. mBridge allows countries to settle trade directly between their own central bank digital currencies, completely bypassing the dollar, bypassing SWIFT, and bypassing any possibility of American sanctions. For countries in Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America that have long felt uncomfortable with dollar dependency, this is an enormous development. Is not just a payment system. Is financial sovereignty. The geopolitical context here cannot be overstated. China's push is not happening in a vacuum. Is happening precisely at a moment when confidence in dollar-based institutions is eroding in ways that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. The weaponization of the dollar through sanctions has made many governments nervous. The unpredictability of American trade policy under successive administrations has created doubt about U.S. economic stewardship. And the sheer scale of American debt, which continues to balloon year after year, has raised legitimate questions in finance capitals around the world about the long-term stability of the dollar as a reserve asset. As Brad Setzer, a fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and a former U.S. Treasury official, noted, the world already operates within a multipolar currency framework, and the conditions that once made the dollar's dominance unquestioned are gradually being eroded. Not destroyed, not collapsed, eroded, slowly. And that slow erosion is exactly the kind of environment in which a determined, patient actor like China can make significant gains. And let's look at the numbers with clear eyes, because they tell a compelling story even if they don't yet tell the whole story. Global reserves totaled $13 trillion in the third quarter of 2025. The dollar accounted for 56.92% of that, down from 71.19% back in 1999. That is a decline of 14 percentage points in 26 years. Meanwhile, yuan-denominated reserves, while still modest at around 2%, are being held by a growing number of central banks. The yuan's share of global payments has risen to over 4%, its highest level since 2016. And SWIFT data from June 2025 shows the dollar's share of international payments had slipped to 48.46%. Now critics, and there are credible ones, will tell you that 2% of global reserves is nowhere near enough to challenge the dollar. And they are right that the gap is enormous. They will point out that China's strict capital controls, the limits Beijing places on how much money can move in and out of the country, make the yuan fundamentally unattractive as a reserve currency. A reserve currency, economists will tell you, requires open, deep capital markets. It requires that foreigners can accumulate large, liquid claims on the issuing country. And China, for now, does not allow that. As Oxford economist George Magnus put it, China's capital markets are far too immature and unconducive, and the yuan is likely to remain a tiny fraction of global reserve assets in the near term. Fair point. But here is where I want to challenge the conventional wisdom, because I think it misses the actual game China is playing. Beijing is not trying to replace the dollar overnight. Xi Jinping is not sitting in Zhongnanhai expecting to wake up next Tuesday in a yuan-dominated world. The strategy is more nuanced, more patient, and arguably more dangerous than a frontal assault on dollar hegemony. What China is doing is building parallel infrastructure, alternative payment rails, alternative settlement systems, alternative reserve options, so that when countries want to move away from the dollar, the exit door is already built and ready to walk through. Think about it this way. For decades, the dollar's dominance was not just about American economic strength. It was about the fact that there was no viable alternative. You had to use dollars because everyone else used dollars and there was nowhere else to go. SWIFT was the only highway. The U.S. Treasury market was the only truly deep and liquid safe haven. China is systematically addressing that problem, not by tearing down the highway, but by building new roads alongside it. And here is something that most Western analysts are not giving enough weight to. China's trade surplus reached $1.2 trillion in 2025. $1.2 trillion. That is the largest trade surplus ever recorded by any country in history. And approximately 30% of China's trade is now settled in yuan, up from just 10% in 2017. That means the yuan is already moving through the global system in enormous volumes. It is being used for real transactions between real businesses in real countries. And as China continues to push its trading partners through debt conversions, currency swaps, and digital infrastructure towards settling in yuan, that 30% is going to keep climbing. And here is another angle that rarely gets discussed. The yuan's recent strength is itself a signal. The currency has moved below 7 to the US dollar, an appreciated level that signals Beijing is now comfortable with a stronger yuan. For decades, China deliberately kept its currency weak to make exports cheaper. That was the old playbook. The new playbook is different. A stronger yuan makes it more attractive as a store of value. It makes it more credible as a reserve asset. Xi Jinping's call for a powerful yuan is not just rhetoric, it is a fundamental shift in China's monetary philosophy. Now let's talk about the digital frontier because this is where the next decade is going to be decided. The global race between China's digital yuan and America's dollar stablecoin ecosystem is one of the most consequential financial competitions in modern history, and most people have absolutely no idea it is happening. In July 2025, President Trump signed the Genius Act, the first major federal framework for payment stablecoins in the United States. The law essentially tries to extend dollar dominance into the digital age by encouraging dollar-backed stablecoins to become the de facto digital currency of global commerce. The idea is simple. If the world adopts dollar-backed stablecoins at scale, global demand for dollars grows even further, even in places that previously had limited access to the U.S. financial system. China's response is the e-CNY and Yuan-backed stablecoins. In August 2025, reports emerged that China's State Council was set to review a roadmap for yuan-backed stablecoins, with implementation discussions taking place at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. Hong Kong's stablecoin ordinance, which came into effect in August 2025, and Shanghai's digital yuan hub signal that Beijing is moving fast. The PBOC advisor Huang Yiping put it plainly: an offshore yuan stablecoin in Hong Kong is not just a possibility, it is a when, not an if. Here is why this matters so much. Right now, dollar-backed stablecoins dominate the digital currency market, controlling over 99% of the $247 billion global stablecoin market. But China's e-CNY strategy does not try to compete in open crypto markets. It creates entirely separate infrastructure, government-controlled, traceable, and designed to make yuan the natural currency for cross-border digital trade in China's sphere of influence. If you are a business in Southeast Asia, Central Asia, Africa, or Latin America doing trade with China, which is now the largest trading partner of more than 120 countries, the path of least resistance is increasingly going to be digital yuan. And the final piece of this puzzle is BRICS. The bloc that now includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Iran, the UAE, Ethiopia, Egypt, and others represents a massive and growing share of global economic output and population. China has been deepening financial ties with BRICS partners through yuan-denominated trade, debt financing, and infrastructure investment. Russia, cut off from the Western financial system, now conducts effectively all its trade with China in yuan, a relationship born of necessity that nonetheless demonstrates the yuan's functional capacity to operate as a major bilateral currency. Kevin Lam, an economist at Pantheon Macroeconomics, said it clearly: from China's perspective, the timing is ideal, with global investors speculating about dollar weakness, Fed credibility under pressure, and geopolitical upheaval creating a window of opportunity that Beijing is not going to let pass. So where does this leave us? Let's be honest about what we know and what we don't. The dollar is not going to collapse next year. The yuan is not going to be the world's reserve currency by 2028. Anyone telling you otherwise is overstating the case. But something genuinely significant is shifting. The infrastructure for a post-dollar world, or at minimum, a multi-currency world, is being built right now. The rails are going in. The swap lines are active. The digital systems are processing real transactions. And the geopolitical conditions have never been more favorable for countries to diversify away from exclusive dollar dependence. Ishwar Prasad, economics professor at Cornell University, put it clearly: the yuan will undoubtedly increase its share of reserve holdings in emerging markets as central banks diversify to hedge against global financial uncertainty. That is not a radical prediction. That is a measured, evidence-based forecast from one of the world's leading currency economists. And even a modest increase, from 2% of global reserves to 5 or 6%, would represent trillions of dollars shifting toward the yuan. That is not a footnote. That is a seismic shift. Xi Jinping understands something that many Western policymakers have been slow to grasp. You do not have to win the dollar war to win the financial future. You just have to build a world where the dollar has competition. A world where sanctions lose their teeth because countries have alternatives. A world where China's trade relationships are conducted in China's currency. A world where the price of oil or lithium or semiconductors can be quoted in yuan just as easily as in dollars. That world is being built. Brick by brick. Swap line by swap line. Transaction by transaction. The question is not whether the yuan will challenge the dollar. The question is how far will that challenge go, and how ready is the rest of the world for the answer. This is one of the most important stories of our time. And if you made it this far, you already care more about understanding the real forces shaping our world than 99% of people out there. So do something with that. Hit the like button. It tells the algorithm this content matters. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. We break down these deep geopolitical and economic shifts every single week, and you do not want to be left behind. And share this video. Send it to a friend, drop it in a group chat, post it wherever you can, because this conversation needs to be happening everywhere. The global financial order is changing, and the people who understand how and why will be the ones who are ready for what comes next. We will see you in the next one.